Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar focusing on how can you use your information from Cradle to Cradle certified for your corporate sustainability reports. We're going to wait a couple of minutes until everyone is joining. And I would just like to make sure that everyone can see the slides. Yeah, great. So before we thank you. So before we go into the depth of the subject, maybe I'm going to present Svenja, who's our guest today. So Svenja is part of 2B Policy. Last week you had Baptiste, who is the founder of the company 2B Policy we were working with. And Svenja is the expert in CSRD and Green Claims Directive from 2B Policy. And she's today joining us to bring some light to what is this directive meaning to you and your company. So I think we can maybe already start because we have many points to cover today. So Svenja, would you like to take over to explain the directive?
Yes, thanks a lot, Lucy, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm quite honored to be here today to talk to you about CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is, as you may all already know, a part of the EU's Green Deal legislative package and is quite the hot topic these days because it is actually already being enforced as we speak. CSRD creates one key obligation for companies that are in scope for this legislation, and that is to create annual sustainability reports that have to be publicly made available to stakeholders that are interested in this information. The companies that are in scope of this obligation are large companies, all large companies, and also public interest entities that are small and medium-sized enterprises. The companies that are in scope of this legislation have to, in completing their sustainability reports, adhere to the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which outline different topics that you have to cover in making your reports available. It's important to kind of understand what the aim also is of making this an obligation, completing these reports. The aim is essentially to hold, of course, companies accountable for their sustainability performance, but also to make this information systematically accessible to investors, for example, or other stakeholders who use this information or can use this information to inform their decision-making processes. Now, as far as the European Sustainability Reporting Standards go, the ESRS, there are essentially 3 to 4 different chapters that are at different stages of the development process. Firstly, the sector-agnostic ESRS, which are the only ones that are already finalized, and they're publicly accessible, of course, as well. They were wrapped up at the end of last year, just in time for first implementation this year. They outline the very general requirements that you have to meet, the very general topics that you have to cover in completing sustainability reports. EFRAG, the body that is developing these standards for the European Commission, is also developing sector-specific ESRS for the sectors that you can see listed on this slide. These are at different stages in the development process, the first 4 at the top of this list being more advanced, while the bottom half of this list is in the very early stages of development. Most advanced and not finalized at the current stage are the sustainability reporting standards that are specifically being developed for small and medium-sized enterprises. EFRAG is here actually developing 2 separate chapters, one that is meant for mandatory reports and one that is meant for voluntary reports to ensure that SMEs that want to voluntarily also report on their sustainability performance are able to do so at a reduced reporting obligation weight. Finally, last but not least, something that is quite interesting about the obligation being created under CSRD is that non-EU companies will actually also be in scope of this legislation if they meet certain threshold requirements. These standards are being developed by the European Commission as well. However, since this obligation will kick in at the very late stages of the implementation timeline, these are currently kind of de-escalated in the prioritization for EFRAG. They're expected in the coming years. The timeline on this is not so clear yet. I've talked about the timeline quite a bit already. Perhaps let's move on to the next slide to visualize it a little bit. CSRD came into force at the beginning of last year. And since this year, the first companies are preparing their reports to be published next year. This year, in scope of the obligation to report, are companies that were previously already subject to the non-financial reporting directive. This is large companies that are public interest companies. They will have to issue their reports next year, while from 2026 onwards, all large companies on the EU market that meet at least 2 out of the 3 thresholds that are listed on this slide will also have to complete these annual sustainability reports. Afterwards, from 2027 onwards, listed small and medium-sized enterprises will also be required to issue these reports, while starting in 2029, non-EU companies will have to issue annual reports. All right, after a bit more of the logistical side of things, I want to just take the time to dive into one core concept of CSRD that kind of pops up in every conversation, basically, that you have around CSRD. It's the double materiality, which is kind of the bread and butter of CSRD reporting. It stands at the very beginning of the reporting process that is outlined in the ESRS, in the Sustainability Reporting Standards of the European Union, and influences essentially the entire shape that your sustainability report ultimately will take. The double materiality assessment, it unites 2 concepts that were previously already used in the context of sustainability reporting. Firstly, impact materiality, and secondly, financial materiality. To better understand what these different materialities entail, I like to take a bit of a visual approach. The impact materiality essentially refers to all matters that are important from an inside-out perspective. So if you want to know what is material to your company from an impact materiality assessment, the kinds of questions you're going to be dealing with is, how do my operations and the operations of my direct and indirect business partners affect the environment in which they are situated? How do they affect society at large? Or how do I actually affect my own employees? These are the kind of questions you want to deal with when you're performing your impact materiality assessment. While the financial materiality then takes kind of the complementary outside-in approach of asking, how does the environment and the society in which I am situated as a company with my value chain affect my operations? Does it put parts of my operations at risk? What kind of opportunities does it create for me? Matters become financially material for a company through, for example, changing environmental landscapes or changing climate, or also through changes in the regulatory landscape. These are the kinds of questions and topics that you deal with when you conduct the financial materiality assessment of the double materiality assessment. Now, once you've done these assessments separately, they also tend to overlap quite a bit. You want to draw up a report of all of the topics that you've identified as material. Here, it doesn't matter whether you've only identified them as material from just one perspective of the 2. If they are material from either, they have to go into your report. If you're kind of having trouble with starting the beginning of your double materiality assessment, it's helpful to consider Article 16 of Appendix A of the ESRS. Here you will find a list of specific sustainability issues that you definitely have to consider when completing your materiality assessment. It's also important to note here, though, that this is a starting list. You also have to consider other issues that may be material or that you know to be material for your operations, even if they're not listed here explicitly. All right, that was probably quite a lot, and also quite a lot of theoretical and conceptual talk. To make these things more concrete, also to give you a better idea of how Cradle to Cradle can help you with your efforts to meet the obligations that CSRD creates for your companies, I'm going to give the floor back to Lucy. Take it away.
Thank you, Svenja, for this very detailed explanation of the directive. And I think it's really good to have it from the perspective of an expert, and you gave really good practical examples. So thank you very much. I want to just make a general explanation, general claim that this webinar is recorded, and all the questions that you will be putting into the chat or in the Q&A will be either answered at the end of this webinar, or in an email when we will be sharing this recording. So please share any questions that you would like us to address. So now taking it more into the perspective or the standards. So you all wondered, and we have had many questions regarding to what extent Cradle Certified can help to report on those specific topics that are required under the CSRD, under the environmental, social, and governance practices. So as you might have noticed, if you went through the directive or through the different topics that are covered, you will see that many of these topics are actually found in the standards, in Cradle Certified standard. The main difference is, and what Svenja just highlighted very well, is that Cradle Certified requires you to comply with all expected requirements, so all requirements written in the standard, depending on the level of achievement you are willing to certify against. But the CSRD requires you to only identify first which points are material, and then to disclose your impacts regarding those identified topics. So Cradle to Cradle Certified in that sense gives you some important data that can be shared for your reports, but also gives you data that goes beyond. And it can also make your reports more robust in a way that you can show to investors. Because if we take a step back, these reports are meant to attract investors, to prove the sustainability approach that your company is taking. So you can justify that your company is taking a step further compared to others. So having certified products can definitely support and even extend the scope of your reports. So when we look at the cross-cutting standards, there are two requirements that you can find within the whole different sub-requirements, which is the double materiality. So the standard only covers one part, the impact materiality. And as I explained just before, it's not fully, you don't get only the information for this assessment of what was identified to be where the most impact is happening, but you have more information. And the standard doesn't cover the financial materiality, because this is not what the standard is trying to achieve here. In terms of sustainability due diligence, we will go more in depth into this next week with the CSRD due diligence directive, but it is covered in the standard. Mostly separated into two categories, in the environmental policy and management, and in the social fairness category, tackling environmental and human rights policies and risks assessment. One of the quite important topic also is the scope. So the CSRD is requiring companies to disclose on their value chain, on the value chain data collection. And Cradle Certified has different varies in scope. So depending on the level achieved, on the requirement, the scope can go from the own operations to the applicant the applicant company, which is similarly to the own operations, to the final manufacturing stage. So this is very specific to Cradle Certified. There's an external document that refers to what does it mean for your products. It varies per product groups. And for many requirements, it goes beyond, especially when we talk about the risk assessment, so the environmental risk assessment or the human rights risk assessments. You need to establish the expectations for the company, for the value chain, for the affected communities, and other relevant stakeholders. So this is fully aligned with the scope of the CSRD in that sense, which is the base of the CSRD, the risk assessment. But we'll go more in depth into this later. And then in terms of time horizons, well, the CSRD is requesting companies to disclose, to disclose their information and report on those on a yearly basis. While the certification gives you 3 years to complete the recertification process and to improve over time and to gather additional data. Just on that note, the CSRD doesn't require to improve over time. It only requires to disclose information. It is the company's objective and commitment to decide whether they want to improve and to update the requirements, to update what is reported or not. And then another important general disclosure requirement, it is the structure. So most of the topics found in the environmental and the social sections cover the structure of having an impact, risk, and opportunity management, and then defining specific metrics and targets linked to the implemented policies that were described after establishing what were the impact, risk, and opportunities found. So this is also something that now I'm going to take you more closely into. This is quite a technical requirement. So most of these topics, when we take just one within the environmental section, climate change, E1, or social, S1, while establishing the impact, risk, and opportunity, there is a need to implement a policy related to that specific topic. So here, environment, climate change, and here related to the own workforce for the social. And then there is requirement to dedicate specific actions and allocate specific resources related to this topic. And it is quite interesting to see that the standard is also following that framework by first asking companies to implement a human rights policy or an environmental policy, and then assessing the risks and opportunities. So it is really aligned. And then when it is required to define specific targets, to set specific targets, and to assess specific metrics, well, these are also found within the standard, but across various topics and categories in the standard. So there are many alignments also in that sense. And it is important to always keep in mind that the topic needs to be identified as being material before reporting on it, or unless you want to report additional disclosures. So as a very general summary, the environment topics that the European Commission has defined are climate change, pollution, water, biodiversity, and circular economy. And quite interestingly, they are all linked to many of the requirements found in all the categories throughout the whole standard. Similarly to social, it is meant to be addressed for the own workforce, workers in the value chain, the affected communities, and consumers and end users. And this is also largely found in the standard. And some might have noticed also that when we revised version 4.1, we addressed some of these topics that we already noticed that were not aligned with the CSRD. So we wanted to make sure that you will have the data also that will be aligning with what was requested under the CSRD. And then lastly, governance. It is mostly found in the social fairness section. So if we look a bit more high level, I also already explained that, and we already explained that quickly, so I'm going to go fast. And also we presented that last week. So you will have additional data, primary data that can be used for your reports. The reports doesn't prescribe any methodology. It only asks to present which methodology was used to explain how this data was verified and how this data was found. And therefore, the certification and the standard can really help you to have all the defined methodology that needs to be disclosed for your report. So it avoids you to go everywhere and ask many different experts. Well, you have everything that is specifically defined in the standard with many annex and additional documents that mention specific international standards or testing methods that are trusted by us and by also the European Commission. So this is quite interesting to keep in mind, and it's also allows you to have additional value to your reports. If you decide to share specifically on land use change, animal welfare, and effluent treatment, these topics are only implicitly mentioned in the CSRD. So you can definitely also prove that you are addressing some specific topics that are not yet covered by the European Commission. Where we find the main divergences is that the materiality assessment, well, the C2C certified doesn't cover the financial materiality. It is also not assessing every single point, especially at bronze level, to cover the whole supply chain. As of gold, we can say that most of the requirements are addressed for the full supply chain, but as of bronze and silver, it might only be linked to the final manufacturing stage and sometimes up to tier 1 suppliers. It all depends on each requirement. And then something to keep in mind, the requirements of Credit Certified are always product-based requirements versus the company level requirements from the CSRD. Although you can note that there is a company risk assessment that is required for the environmental section and human rights risk section. So these are fully aligned, and these are very important for when assessing your materiality, when doing your materiality assessment. Now looking at if we reverse it, so from the topics defined by the Credit Certified standard, we can see that many of the requirements are also found within those sections, similarly to the next 3 sections. So now I will present a couple of these slides, trying to go as well to present as many as possible, but you will have access to these documents, and you will have in the left hand side all Cradle certified requirements for each category detailed, and then on the right side the CSRD requirements and to what extent does it align or where it goes beyond or not. So we're going to start with one of the most important part, which is the environmental policy and assessing environmental risks. So we ask companies in the standards to establish their expectations for the applicant company, the supply chain, communities, potentially affected groups, and other relevant stakeholders. So this is fully aligned with what the CSRD is requiring to disclose the company's environmental policy. And it can be linked to different disclosure categories, can be linked to climate change, to pollution, to water, etc., depending on what was identified as being material. And the disclosure on financial expenditure to make plans more concrete is out of scope from the Credit Certified requirements, as already mentioned. Then if we look at assessing the risks and opportunities, well, the assessment approach is aligned with the logic of the CSRD again. This is one of the very important topic from the CSRD. And there, when we look at the bronze and silver, it is looking mainly at the final manufacturing stage facilities and for the certified products. But then going beyond, further into gold, we extend the scope to the supply chain. And it is can be found in the next slide. When assessing so when we ask companies to monitor and verify performance, we ask companies at the silver level to request data to measure performance against environmental policy. And this is something that the CSRD is very is explaining in details. So they are aware that the data from all the supply chain is very difficult to gather and to collect. Therefore, there is a notion of reasonable efforts to collect these value chain data. And it means that there is an option to either gather the information directly from your value chain or to employ estimates or use a mix of both methods to collect the data and to provide this information. And it is also something that comes back into the CSRD. So it's important to keep that in mind. And this is quite aligned with this requirement because we see it similarly to the CSRD. Then looking at the many requirements also that are found again and again within the standards about recertification to demonstrate continued efforts and to improve, to also check whether when the target was set, if the target was achieved. All of these requirements at recertification are also aligned with the directive in its approach because there is a requirement to disclose yearly. And therefore, you will have these data and these also improvement tool that the certification is all about to complete your reports and to show that you are improving over time and disclosing about those in the reports. So when we look at the strategy for environmental policy implementation, we ask companies to develop a strategy to implement this environmental policy and report on progress. Well, this is also aligned with the logic of the directive that requires to implement a policy and define actions and targets linked to the company strategy. Therefore, this can be completely also disclosed and used. Demonstrating commitment and environmental management systems. Well, there is a disclosure requirement on how companies are able to provide the needed expertise for implementation of policies and strategies. And environmental management systems at gold. This is also aligned with the directive where sourcing materials is very likely to emerge as a material impact stage for many products. So yeah, this is what's for now. The CSRD reports are not yet published, but this is something that will for sure come back, and therefore this is quite of an important also topic. And these can be also integrated in the sustainability report in the general disclosure, so the number 2, or the E4 and E5, so related to the circular economy and to biodiversity. I think we are going to skip some. We're going to just go for the transparency. Well, this is also technically provided with the report itself, asking to use open and transparent governance and reporting and making all this information publicly available is what the CSRD is technically also requiring from its approach. The environmental protection incentives. So if you go all the way to platinum, then this is also can be integrated into report on the government 3. And the point on measurable improvement. This is overall the requirement from the certification that from the start, since its creation, the requirement that when a company is recertifying, there need to be a demonstration of an improvement that was achieved, to prove that there is an incentive to continuously improve the way the products are designed, or the way that you work with your supply chain or your manufacturers. So this is something that is technically not really required by the CSRD, so it goes beyond, and this is something that, as I was already said, will also give more strength to your reports. The material health section, well, the CSRD does not introduce any requirements regarding the composition of products or the materials contents, but it only requires and adds obligations to report on the amount of substances of concern and substances of very high concern in the company's value chain. So therefore, the material health section, with all the different requirements, will support the CSRD reporting requirements. So when the first requirement being that the product needs to comply with leading chemical regulations, well, the section completely aligns with REACH and other EU regulations that restrict chemicals in products. And you can read also all of these information, and it also explains where can it be integrated into which policy. Again, we always need to make sure that this was identified as being material to your company. So if you define that substances of concern is identified as a material risks, then you will need to report on it, and then you can include it into a policy, either under the resource use and circular economy section, or policies for water use and marine resources management. And always keeping in mind that this is focusing on the products and not on the full company level. Always to keep these points in mind when using the information. So similarly, organohalogens, it goes beyond the CSRD reporting requirements. There's no requirements to avoid, but only to disclose about these substances of concern. For the material and chemical inventory, can be integrated in the resource inflow disclosures, so under the circular economy, and pollution disclosures as well, if these are identified as being material to your company. I think I will maybe skip the rest of the CSR of the material health, because we won't have time to go through everything. So I'm going to go to the product circularity section, and please, if you have questions in the future, just send us these questions regarding these tables, and we will support. So now looking at product circularity, well, there is in the standard the definition of the two different cycles, so technical and biological cycles, and this is not referred in the CSRD. So it is good to always mention where does it come from if you report on that. So mention the standard, and all the time it is always important also to refer to the methodology used. So if you refer to the methodologies for the chemical assessment in the material health, also it is important to refer to our chemical assessment methodology. And with this requirement from the CSRD, you need to define the cycle. So we ask to define the cycle, and it is aligned with the disclosures on material inflows, so explaining what comes into your product, and outflows, what comes out of the products, under the circular economy. So it's quite interesting because there are not so many certification that can provide all this information, and our certification truly helps, especially on this section. So it is just important to keep in mind the aggregation level. The CSRD requires this information at the company level, and we only assess the certified products with the certification. And there is also an interesting point with the critical certified standards, the circularity data report that requires many of this information to be publicly disclosed. Well, this is fully aligned with also the CSRD requirements on making this information available. And we ask specifically the reverse logistics details and look the locations where it can be fully processed and cycled. So to keep that in mind. So preparing for active cycling, we ask companies to develop a cycling plan and to develop concrete action plan with the company to reach a defined target and act upon a formulated policy. Well, this is aligned with the logic of the policy action target metric dimension of the CSRD. And it will be important to add a timeline to this if you add it and if this is identified as being material to your company. Initiating partnership also for recovery and processing the product. Well, this can also be used as a defined target under E5, the circular economy, but it is mostly a voluntary requirement in the CSRD. So this is where you can see that the standard goes also beyond in some ways. Increasing demand, incorporating cycle and renewable content. Well, there is a content disclosure from the directive, but there are no requirements on increasing that content over time. So this can be used as a target or a metric under the circular economy topic. You can also use it as a policy to increase recycled content in products. An example of policy actions, it is actually an example of the policy actions in the ESRS themselves. And you always need to be careful with the aggregated level. So it is at the product level for this information that you gathered. This is again increasing demand. So it is similar to what I explained before. And there is one alternative. So we also allow as a path to publicly disclose if there is limitations to achieve these minimum requirements. And this is also what the CSRD is explaining in its core, that if the requirements cannot be achieved, if the disclosure can't be found, if the data cannot be found, what is important to explain the limitations and how to remediate to that, to gather the data for the next reports. So this is also something to keep in mind, and that is also aligned in that regard. Material compatibility for the cycles. So this can be integrated as a target metric under the resource use and circular economy. It will always be good to explain the methodology used or the main assumptions applied for this calculation. And the circularity data and cycling instructions, I already explained it. It will help you to have this the information also provided for the corporate sustainability reporting directive, but also for the future digital product passport. Although the data points are not yet defined, the Cradle Certified gives you access to a DPP that has verified data ahead of the Green Claims Directive's DPP. Next, we will look at the circular design opportunities and innovation. Well, this can also be an action set under the policy, under E5, again, resource use and circular economy, and make sure that you include clear time-bound targets if you develop this plan. The disassembly also requirements can be used as an action under your policy action target metric dimension, and be used under E5 again.
Lucy,
yeah.
Lucy, sorry, you were cutting out for a second. I'm not sure whether it was just for me, but maybe you can just repeat what you said in the last 20 seconds.
Okay. So the disassembly requirements for product disassembly to make sure they will be cycled the right way. This can be also disclosed under the policy action target metric dimension from the CSRD and be the basis of several actions to be implemented by the company. And again, you can explain the relevant methodology used, and include a time-bound target metric linked to it. Active cycling, so making sure that the products will be cycled and will be really cycled. This is also the basis for several actions that can be implemented by a company. So it can be disclosed under the resource use and circular economy topic. And you should also include a clear time-bound target to this. There is a requirement to demonstrate increase in cumulative rate or quality with this certification. And this is also aligned with the logic on reporting progress regarding formulated targets. So if you define a target to reach for your next report, then you will need to report on how did you reach that target, and if not, explaining the limitations. And therefore, this is aligned with the directive's requirement. Now, if we're looking at clean air climate protection, as we're not going to have time to go through it all, what is very important to understand from the European Commission, it comes from the CSRD, but from also other regulations, there will be a strict requirement for companies to explain how greenhouse gas emissions were addressed, and the use of offsets or carbon credits cannot be used to meet targets. So this is something that is very important and that we keep also repeating along the different requirements. But this is also going to be a requirement under the Green Claims Directive, that a company will not be able to claim that they are carbon neutral or that they reduced a certain amount of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, if it was achieved by using carbon credits or carbon offsets. So this is something I want just to make sure that everyone is aware, as it is a very important requirement from the Commission. So, well, when we look at the air emission compliance, the first point, it is not a direct requirement, but it can still be integrated into the environmental climate change part. The first environmental topic, climate change, mitigation and adaptation. And this is, well, at bronze level, you can see it is for the final manufacturing stage facilities, but you will have to, if you use it, to extend it to the full supply chain. When we look at quantifying greenhouse gas emissions, the Commission also requires to extend it to the full supply chain. As of bronze level, the standard does not cover the full supply chain. It requires to quantify greenhouse gas emissions associated with the final manufacturing stage of the product, while at silver for some products or gold for other products, this is extended to the full supply chain. There is also a requirement of if it is self-reported. So we allow self-reports, but you need to conduct an internal review in case it could not be third-party verified. And this is likely to be insufficient for the CSRD requirements. So just to keep in mind, well, if you are using third-party verifications for this, for quantifying your greenhouse gas emissions, well, this is also making your reports much stronger, as it is not yet a requirement. And it is the same for all the reports, all the different requirements that are third-party verified will bring an additional structure and substance to your reports when compared to others who are just having their full reports that is audited, because that's one of the requirements from the directive, to have the full reports audited, but not each specific requirement. Looking at the clean air and climate protection strategy, this is also aligned with the first environmental topic, which is assessing which is linked to climate change mitigation and adaptation. And it can be reported as a company policy, company action, if you add also targets to this strategy. and metrics. So again, if you have, if it is audited by a third party, your strategy was audited by a third party, and you can verify that your targets were achieved by a third party. It also gives additional robustness to your report. So the 6.4, it's about targets. How can you set targets to use renewable electricity and addressing greenhouse gas emission within your final manufacturing stage? Well, this can definitely also be integrated into your reports, following the policy action target metric dimension. That is what the whole report is about. And you just need to make sure that this was identified as being material to you. So maybe it is not one of the most important materiality topic found in your value chain. And it is always good to keep in mind that you need to report the offsets separately to what was truly reduced within your operations. For meeting the targets, it is always along the same axis, so the axis of policy action target metric. You need to define the specifics of calculation methods, for which methods have you been using, or the assumptions that were made to define these targets. And it is important to track the company's performance in meeting these targets. And by having a third-party verification, it will help significantly to comply and to move away from limiting yourself to reasonable assurance, which is still accepted, of course, from the CSRD, but we want to move away from this and have primary data also to make this report stronger. This is also something that I will skip. There is something that is important here, the transparency section. So we require EPDs for some products, especially for construction products or for other product types. Well, this might become a sector-specific requirement. It's not yet there. So it's interesting to keep an eye on that and to know that it is required as of silver for construction products and building materials. And that can also be used as a company policy and action in the climate change topic, for the climate change topic, or for the circular economy topic. It will also give you important information to disclose. Addressing embodied greenhouse gas emissions. Well, report offsets needs to be separated, as we said, and it is again along the policy action target metric dimension. If you want to disclose on this, if it was identified as being material. So I need to check the time. We don't have so much time. I think we are going to have to go through the questions. If there are any questions regarding the water and soil stewardship and the social fairness categories, social fairness is really much similar to the environmental policy section that I described. And for water and soil stewardship, it is pretty clear, I think, what is described. But if you have any questions, feel free to just reach out. What I also want to explain before we go to the questions, when you have your assessment report, where you fill in all your information, well, you will have now a column with the CSRD requirements and all the information that was explained, and then you will know where this can be used for your report, for your non-financial reports. So this is going to help you to comply with the CSRD in a much more efficient way, and to have access to data that you might not even know that you have. So make sure that you verify this when you work, or if you don't work with the same teams, make sure that you work with the team that are working on the reports. And I will share the link later, but make sure to follow the next session on the CSDD, the forced labor, and the SPR. Okay, now I'm going to stop talking. I'm sorry, I've talked a bit too too much, so much to cover. So please let me know if you have any questions on what was already addressed. And then we will, of course, answer any additional questions that we could not tackle. So Svenja, did you have time to check if there were questions that you want to address?
There was only one question dropped in the
Okay.
Q&A section. I already provided my perspective, but perhaps you want to add to the question. It relates to the reverse effect of what we discussed. So in what way can CSRD reporting or a CSRD analysis help meet C2C criteria?
So that's a very good question. The issue with the CSRD reports is that it is not every single point is going to be audited. It's the full report that will be audited, and also some requirements, there are limitations. So some requirements will not be met by a company, and they need to explain why not. Or some points will not be identified as being material. So there is a huge chance that the reports will not be able to be used by C2C certified unless it is backed by methods and testing methods or relevant standard, international standard that we also cover. Specifically for the social fairness part, we haven't had time to go through it, but when we refer to the International Labour Organization or United Nations guiding principles, all of these standards, if it is aligned, then we could potentially use that. But mostly, I doubt that the reports can be used for meeting the the standard of the certification. But yes, Svenja, if you have something else you want to add.
Yeah, upon further reflection, I think also an important thing to keep in mind here is the difference in scope that we already discussed. While C2C specifically refers to products, it's a product level certification. CSRD requires company level or even beyond the company assessments. So there is quite the difference in scope here that will also need to be taken into consideration. And that will make using CSRD information very challenging in the context of C2C. But the one example that I could come up with where it might be useful was the risk assessment that we mentioned earlier, where you also have to complete the risk assessment at the level of the company for C2C. So this information may be reproducible in the context of C2C. I don't know, what's your perspective on that, Lucy?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. The risk assessment is quite aligned, and we version 4.1 we extended the due diligence for for the environmental section also to be fully aligned with the CSRD. So I think yeah, the scope is extended to this. We define the same the value chain, the same stakeholders found around the value chain. So I think that will be aligned. Yes, indeed.
All right. Yeah. We have one more question that just came in, which relates to the intervals, the difference in intervals. Perhaps if you want to speak to that, Lucy.
One issue that affects this, it works on 3 years basis, whether the reporting will be yearly, courtesy will be useful. So the reports is not requesting to disclose additional, well, actually, for the targets, there will be a requirement to explain how those targets were achieved, but the targets can be set for 5 years' time. It doesn't need to be on a yearly basis. The only thing that is required on a yearly basis is to disclose the same information and making sure that it remains the same. So the certification is useful, probably mostly for the scope of the 3 years. That's what I would assume.
Yeah, I do also think that there is the dimension that CSRD will require you to track progress on your targets on a yearly basis, which is then information you can reproduce and reuse in the context of C2C recertification. So you're basically already staying on track every year. You can track your performance every year, which can then inadvertently help you make sure that you're also meeting your C2C requirements.
And the targets that can be difficult to set as a company, you can explain that the credit certified standard gives you the tools to set these targets, and they're set based on scientific evidence and not just coming out of nowhere. So this also gives a stronger point for your reports. All right. I'm not sure if someone wants to take he wants to raise their hand. I can also give them the access to speak. I think it's a lot of information, and in the end, it's also important to go in depth in all of these detailed requirements. So what I suggest is that I will, if no one is raising their hands or asking more questions, I will so send the recording this week, and you will have access on our website to this page end of this week with this document to be downloaded. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and Svenja, and we will make sure that we can support you this way. And anyways, I want to thank you all for joining, and thank you, Svenja, also for providing this very in-depth technical information on the directive. And I will say to everyone a good afternoon or day, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much, and I wish everyone a nice day.
Thank you, Lucy. Good evening,
Bye.
everyone, and good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.